Actually, can you hear my voice here?
Yes, we can. I
Uh-huh.
guess it would be nice to have a recording.
Thank you. So we start the recording. So job order costing system is really good when we have the unique items to produce or unique processes. Looking back to our prior material, so please try to answer this quick check number 1. Do you remember what is the cost of the job? So what would be the job cost? So I suppose it's clear that the correct answer is this one. As we use our manufacturing overhead. So Yulia, you are right. I see the answer in the chat. Just a second. Yulia, yes, you are correct. Because we need to sum up direct materials, direct labor, and overhead assigned to a specific job using the predetermined rate. When we have multiple jobs, we will transform our job order costing systems. We have to calculate multiple predetermined overhead rates if our departments are really different. For example, if we have 2 production departments, milling and assembly, so we should use specific rates for each department, because the first one, milling, is driven by the machine hours, and the second is driven by labor hours, and therefore they cannot use the only predetermined overhead rate, and they need to use different rates in order to allocate the indirect cost correctly. First of all, we need to identify the predetermined overhead cost for each department. So we have to use this data to find the overhead cost. So we apply the rate and the cost to the cost driver and sum up with the previous data. Next step is to calculate the predetermined overhead rate for each department. So we have to identify the rate for each department based on the specific cost driver. Step number 3 is to apply this previously calculated rate to a cost of specific job. So we have to apply this calculated rate to a specified job and calculate the total amount of the cost for each department. And therefore, we will sum up all the elements and calculate the total cost of job, which is consisting of 2 different activities, milling and assembly. So I think the idea is clear, and it's really clear how we can do this, because this costing system is quite simple. The most complicated operation here is to define the cost driver correctly. So then we can use this information regarding the total cost of the job to assign the markup and decide what should be the selling price of this job. The idea is that your selling price should cover all the costs we include into the cost of job, and have the markup plus this amount to pay taxes, to pay some selling and administrative expenses, and to have an income for the future use. I suppose it's clear that this total cost amount is really useful and could be used to calculate the cost of the job. And it's always necessary to do this because otherwise you will sell your job maybe more cheap than it should be sold. And every manager or the owner of the business should control the total cost of the job because they are unique. So when we report our values, we should take into account the idea of under-applied or over-applied overheads. Job order costing for financial statement to external parties may also include those amounts that are known as under-applied overhead or over-applied. In order to keep our reports actual, we need to make some adjustments. So we need to adjust the under-applied overhead to increase the cost of goods sold. Therefore, our net operating income will decrease automatically. If we see that our overhead is over-applied, we have to decrease the cost of goods sold, and therefore our net operating income will increase. Sometimes the incorrect use of over-applied on under-applied overheads and incorrect adjustments, so company may have some problems with taxation because the correct calculation of the overhead is the basis of our net operating income calculation and the basis of taxation actually. So when we monitor the flow of costs under the job order costing system, we can remember that the conceptual flow of cost is including several documents as cost sheets and documents that are related to costing system, then balance sheet and the income statement. And those documents are related to each other with the specified values. So the cost is collected on a production system. Then we collect specific costs like selling and administrative costs using period costing, and then move it to the balance sheet and to the income statement. How this system converts into the job order costing. So the job order costing is using the same principal scheme, but of course details are a bit different because of the specificity of the method. Then let's take some example to illustrate the cost flow. And you can see here the details. And we will see how this system works. First of all, we have to calculate the amount of direct materials and direct labor. Then we collect all indirect expenses as manufacturing overhead. Then we trace manufacturing costs that are directly traced to a cost of job and move it to the finished goods, and then transform the cost of finished goods to a cost of goods sold. And then later the cost of goods sold is coming to the income statement, to where we add other expenses there and calculate the gross profit. The idea here is that all these direct materials, labor, and overhead are collected specifically assigned to each job. And only after that, if all the jobs are complete, we convert it into the cost of goods and move these amounts to the specified account. If your job is not complete, even if, for example, items are complete that are included into the specific jobs, we cannot move it from the work in process account to the finished goods because the job in total is not completed. So the specific thing here is that we cannot move our cost of goods that are complete until the total job will be completed as well. And there could be some specific difficulties because sometimes jobs are very big. For example, if our job is to create a ship or some, I don't know, building, for example, if our job is to construct a building, so we have to keep our work in process until the building will be complete and we can move these buildings to and move the cost of this building from work in process to finished goods. So sometimes it would be difficult because in that case, our work in process account will be very big in comparison with other accounts. So how can we act making transactions? Here we have to move our direct materials directly to the job cost sheet using the work in process sub account to each job. So we create as many sub accounts as we have jobs. Then indirect materials are moved to manufacturing overhead. Then we, and this is a recording of this operation. Then we do the same regarding the work in process and overhead, collecting the materials. Then we assign direct labor cost to work in process again. We control sub-accounts to assign correctly direct labor to a specified job. And the same regarding indirect labor, it should be calculated at manufacturing overhead account, and the transaction is this one. So we split our salaries and wages between work in process and manufacturing overhead. Then we record actual manufacturing overhead costs using specific drivers, for example. We can move those amounts to manufacturing overhead because we have used utilities in our production system, so we have to adjust our accounts table related to utilities for the specified amount that is related to the specific period. So here we had the overhead which is associated with a specific job, but on this step we adjust expenses that are related to a specified period. So later we have to apply overhead on a specified job. So we calculate the portion of the overhead which is associated with the specified job and apply it to this job. So the journal entry would be as following: work in process is debited and manufacturing overhead is credited. And we calculate this amount based on the cost driver. For example, in our case, this cost driver is the machine hour, and we will calculate how many machine hours we work during the period and use this amount to assign the overhead correctly. So non-manufacturing costs are not assigned to individual jobs. They are expensed in the period incurred. So if we have some non-manufacturing costs that are sufficient to our costing system, there could be some difficulties in finding the correct way to assign this to a specified job. Examples of non-manufacturing costs will include salary expense of employees who work in the marketing, selling, and administrative departments. They may represent the advertising expenses for the specific period that are made for the business in total, but not promoting the specified job. So if, for example, those expenses are promoting the job, it would be a bit different story. So let's see the example. We took Virgin Corporation incurred in selling administrative salary costs. What should we do? We should create the special account to expenses and collect those non-manufacturing costs and specify temporary accounts. I suppose you remember what are temporary accounts from the financial module. Then we collect all the expenses. And at the end of the period, we split those expenses between different jobs that we completed during the period. If we decide to move completed jobs from work in process to finished goods, we use again the same way. We credit work in process and debit finished goods, calculating the cost of completed jobs. So then we transfer cost of goods sold from finished goods to a cost of goods sold account using similar transactions. So you can see here. And later calculate the result of operation. So we have to calculate the increase in profit and balance those accounts, calculating the period profit. Any questions from the group? So do you have any questions regarding this part of the material? Is it clear how the cost flow is organized using the job order costing system? So I suppose it's clear. So let's move to the next part. What service companies are doing when they decide to apply the job order costing system? The question here is whether service companies could use the job order costing system. So how do you think? Is it relevant? So what is your opinion regarding this? Job order costing system is applicable to service companies as well. And we can see that the process is very similar to the manufacturing organizations, except that service organizations tend to use fewer materials, especially direct materials, and may use more expenses because of the specificity of the firm. So there could be several questions that service firms should solve. First of all, how do service organizations track direct materials using job costing? So in that case, we can say that they track it the same way as the production organizations are doing, but most direct materials, if are collected together because of the cost of the materials is negligible. For example, if we are speaking about the accountants and some consultancy service, we may see that of course they are using paper and pens and maybe computer service, but of course the direct material cost is very small here. And we cannot say that this job is more profitable because we used less sheets of paper. So it's not so directly traced, and therefore we cannot associate the cost of the sheet of the paper to a specified job, because we don't know how many sheets we need to complete the accounting consultancy, or how many I don't know, computer hours we need to complete the specified job. So we can estimate an average, but not exactly as we do in manufacturing companies. For example, when we produce furniture, we know that this table or chair is requiring 0.5 cubic meter of wood. So we can't say the same regarding the service companies. That's why even service companies have the direct materials. They often collect them on an overhead account and then later assign using the cost drivers. Of course, if the amount of direct materials is big for the service company, there could be some material service companies like dentists, for example, they that could use who can use specified medicals and specific instruments that are not used for other clients, and they know how many instruments should they have to make the service complete. In that case, we can use the direct material allocation as we do for manufacturing companies. The second question here is, how do service organizations track direct labor using job costing? The process of tracking labor using a timesheet and recording labor costs in the journal and job cost sheet is the same as we do for manufacturing companies. What allocation bases are most commonly used by service organizations? Because overhead is typically driven here by direct labor hours, so this is a most common basis for overhead allocation. But if, for example, your service is driven by computer hours or special equipment hours, so you can choose the other allocation basis. For example, if you provide some specific consultancy related to the use of specific equipment, for example, so supercomputer, for example, so your job, even if it is a service area, may be driven by the computer hours, but not the direct labor hours. But still, the most common allocation basis here is the cost, the number of labor hours. How do service organizations record overhead applied using job costing? The process of recording this information is exactly the same as for manufacturing company. So the only difference is the cost of direct materials, because most of service companies have no direct materials, or the amount of direct materials is really very, very small. And they do not need to create special accounts to understand to identify the concrete amount of direct materials to track them directly. So here you can see the basic table that will highlight the difference between manufacturing firm and service firm. So you can use this table for your answers and for your calculations. So the table is quite big, and all these questions are discussed already during this particular topic. So do you have any questions about the job order costing system? Any questions, or everything is clear? Okay, I think it's clear. The second system that I want to share with you is the process costing. And this process costing system is very similar to job order costing system. That's why they are usually discussed together. Both systems assign material, labor, and overhead cost to products, and they provide a mechanism for computing unit product cost. So what is the difference between job order and process costing? Job order costing system is based on the uniqueness of your item that you decide to produce, but process costing is based on the opposite definition, because process costing is really good for the flow of goods and services that are identical and that are similar. And both systems are providing the special mechanism for computing unit product cost very close to the real cost of those units. Both systems use the same manufacturing accounts as manufacturing overhead, raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. And the flow of costs through the manufacturing accounts is basically the same in both systems. So there is no huge difference between those systems. But some differences could be highlighted here. Job order costing is used for many different jobs that are worked on each period, and each job have unique production requirements. But process costing assume that we produce single or very similar product every time, and all units are identical. For example, we may produce cookies, so all the cookies are similar. Of course, if we will be evaluating the variation coefficient, so they could be a bit different. Of course, the normal distribution is applied to the massive production, but for our customers, for the cost, for our management system, so it's no different between one cookie and the other cookie, which is almost exactly the same. So process costing is good where flow of goods or services are similar, and we cannot define one item from other items, so because they are not unique. Job order costing assume that costs are accumulated by individual job. So as our job is individual, costs should be accumulated in relation to the specific job. But in process costing, we accumulate our costs using the department as the unit for allocation of the cost. In job order costing, we assume that unit costs are computed by job on the job cost sheet. So if we define the cost of each individual unit, which is included in the specified job, so we have to calculate the cost of the total job at first, and then split it between several units that are included into the cost, included into the job. In process costing, unit costs are computed by department and do not associated with a specified job or bunch of production or something like that. Let me give some examples of differences between job order costing and process costing. First of all, let's imagine that we produce the chocolate boxes, and inside of those boxes we have small chocolate pieces packed individually into the smart package or smart paper coverage. On the process costing, all our chocolate boxes should be the same. They should include almost identical number of chocolates, or they could be a bit different, but we won't have more than 2 or 3 variations. For example, we can pack our chocolate in the box of 10 pieces, or 12 pieces, or 20 pieces. That's it. And all chocolate pieces in the box are the same. And we calculate our cost associated with the specified department. For example, there could be production department, service department, delivery department, and advertising department. So we calculate the cost of goods associated with the specified activity within the process. If we will do the same chocolate boxes, but using job order costing system, we may provide to our customers the specified and customized products. For example, one client would order the chocolate boxes with the portrait of his pet, for example, and the second client would, for example, order the chocolate boxes where we print the logo of his company over each on the each package. So in that case, of course, chocolate boxes with logo would be the specified job, so would complete the specified job and cannot be associated with the process costing, even if the chocolate pieces inside are identical, but the coverage is different, and that's why this is a separate job. And only when we calculate the total cost of the job, how much does it cost to produce the chocolate boxes with the specified logo, we can divide it by number of boxes and decide whether the unit cost is good enough for our process. So job order costing system do not allow to mix our products between different boxes, for example, between different jobs. So we cannot sell those boxes with logo to other clients because they are specified and they are produced for special needs. That's why products of this sort are a bit more expensive because all the items in the job are individual. If we will see the same scheme of the flow of cost in a process costing system to compare it with the job order costing system, we can see that all the materials and labor and manufacturing overhead costs are calculated in a special processing department where they are splitted by departments. For example, there could be some specified departments, operational and delivery department, and maybe some more. And only then the cost of goods is transferred to finished goods account and later to the cost of goods sold account. I think the idea is clear that both processes are very similar, but the basis of allocation is different, and the approach to the costing is a bit different because of the specificity of the production process. So we cannot choose the right costing system without knowing the specificity of the business model of the company. That's why management accounting is working very closely with managers in order to understand correctly which system is the best for this particular company. And two companies from the same industry would have really different business models and therefore different costing systems. So what do you need to do? Using the process costing and compute the cost of goods sold. In process costing, each department needs to calculate numbers for financial reporting purposes, the cost of ending work in process inventory, and the cost of its completed units. So when we tell that our items are identical and units are equal, we have to use the specific methods that could provide those values. And you know already that those two methods are FIFO or the weighted average method. So both methods are good enough to calculate the process costing elements and to calculate the inventory cost and the cost of goods sold. Next concept is to calculate the conversion costs. So here direct labor costs are often small in comparison to the other product costs because if our products are similar, and that will meant that we are using the massive production, and that's why direct labor hours are not so important here, because the machine hours could be more relevant in this case, and the material cost is more efficient in this case. So direct labor cost is really small in comparison with the cost of materials and machine hours. So therefore, as our products are almost identical, we use the approach of equivalent units instead of individual unit of production. And equivalent units means that your products are almost the same, but if they are a bit different, they are the same equivalent units if they do not require specific change in the production process. For example, if we decide to produce pencils and we produce red pencils, then we produce black and blue, all these pencils are identical for the production, for the process costing, because they are equivalent. They are using different pigments for production, but the same material, the same way of production, and the same calibration system, and so on and so forth. So equivalent units means that some products could have some variations, but they still are the same products. It's taken for the simplicity, of course. So let's start and try to answer a question related to the production, to the process costing and the product equivalence. So what do you think about this? So if Journe started 15,000 units and completed 10,000 units, how many equivalent units of production did Journe have for the period? So do you have any suggestions? So let me check the chat. Maybe we have some idea. Thank you very much for your solution. And we can see here that actually It is A, if we will be using the job order costing system, but we are using the process costing system, it means that if we have two 50% produced items, it could be registered as one fully produced item using process costing system. I think this is a basic difference between job order costing system and the process costing system. Because for the firm and for the client, there is no different which unit we can produce during the period. We just want to know what number of units are ready and how many units we have produced. It is, of course, the specific approximation using the process costing system, because if, for example, we will sell our items to clients, of course, we can sell only 10,000 units because we can't sell 30% complete units. But for the simplicity of the process of calculation of the cost, we use this assumption as, for example, 5,000 units completed, 30% complete are the same as 1,500 units fully completed. It's this assumption we use for the specificity of the process and for simplification of calculations. So, any questions about the process costing system? Do you have any questions? Is it clear what is the basic difference between job order costing and process costing? So I suppose it's clear that if we sum up all the differences, there would be lots of details, but the most important issue is that process costing is using for the current production process flow when we use production lines to make the equal products, and probably our production is unstoppable, and we can use the same way to calculate the cost. I think a very good example of process costing is the cost of fuel, which we calculate. For example, Rosneft is using the process costing to calculate the cost of oil they drill and sell to the clients, because we, of course, cannot stop the flow of oil and calculate the cost of the specific volume of oil produced, because we have some tubes, we have some special devices to check the volume of production. We use just those values taken from the specific equipment and calculate the process cost, the process cost, and the cost of goods or cost of oil drilled and sold. I think it's clear. And the job order costing system is good if you're Walt Disney and decided to make specific movies or cartoons and collect the specific team for each project and use specific equipment and specific materials to each project. So the cost or the job order costing system is really good for you in that case. But here we can meet one more operation costing system, which is operation costing system. Operation costing is a hybrid of job order and process costing. So because it processes attributes of both approaches. So operation costing is used when batches of different products pass through the same processing department. When those batches are similar but not identical. For example, we produce yarn. We use wool, we use cotton, we use viscose to produce yarn. Maybe we use them in special proportions, maybe in pure content, but still the production process is really similar. The difference is the material used or the maybe mix of materials used. And for this purpose, the operation costing or this hybrid of job order and process costing is really good enough because all the activities are the same, but products are different because of the use of different materials. I think it's also clear. Any questions related to this topic, please? So I suppose this presentation is over and I can open the next one. Just a moment. So now we are familiar with two basic costing systems. First of all, it is a job order costing system. Secondly, it's the process costing system. And third one is the operating costing system. So it's time to add more costing systems to your bagage because there are more than 3 systems, of course, in our economy, and we can choose between different alternatives in order to find the proper system for the business. So this topic is devoted to direct costing, full costing, and ABC, and we start with the traditional costing. So very often you can see this notification in books and relevant articles. So what is traditional costing system and how can we split it from other costing systems in order to use in a proper way? Traditional costing is the system when we allocate the factory overhead to products based on the volume of production or resources consumed. So we will use either volume of production or resources we consume during the process. Under this traditional method, the overhead is applied based on either the amount of direct labor hours consumed or machine hours used. Factory overhead may be much higher than the basis of allocation, so the small change in the volume of resources consumed triggers a massive change of the amount of overhead applied. So this is a weak weak feature of the traditional costing system because it works well when our periods are similar, when we produce equal number of products or almost equal each time, when we produce those products using almost the same materials, if we use the same normative of materials consumption each time. For this purpose, the traditional costing system, but you have learned this traditional costing system within the financial accounting module. For this purpose, this traditional costing is really good when our periods are similar, when our products are similar and materials consumed are also similar. But if we start making some differences, for example, we stop our production for a week because of the quarantine. If we, for example, start making other products that are not similar to our prior products, for example, we start packing our, I don't know, milk, not using only 1 liter bottles, but also half of liter bottles. So in that case, the overhead may be applied in a non-correct way. Traditional costing system still works well for financial statement reporting if we want just to collect the cost of goods sold. Just prepare the financial statement and send them these statements to tax authorities and other users. But if we want to make some decisions based on costing knowledge, it is not so easy to do, because we have to make different classifications, corrections, adjustments, and many other actions to bring this process in order and use this information in a decision-making process. In comparison to this system, activity-based costing is a bit more complicated as a traditional system and as the job order costing system and as the process costing system. Activity-based costing seems to be the most, I think, the most modern system, which arrived, I think, about 30 years ago only. And this is a costing method designed to provide managers with cost information for strategic and other decisions that potentially affect capacity and therefore apply equipment and materials that are often idle. So it's used as a supplement tool to support the usual costing system. So very often ABC is added to a traditional costing system to provide more detailed information about the cost. So sometimes activity-based costing is used not instead of other costing system, but in addition to the current costing system. Under activity-based costing, or ABC in short, a non-manufacturing cost as well as manufacturing cost may be assigned to product, but only on a cause and effect basis. So we have to assign non-manufacturing cost if we know exactly that this cost is really necessary to produce the specific set of items. If we are not sure, we can't, of course, but if we are sure, we can. Some manufacturing cost may be excluded from product cost. So if this cost is not relevant for decision making. Numerous overhead cost pools are used, each of which is allocated to products and other cost objects using its own unique measure of activity. The cost driver here is always a set of cost drivers associated with the specified cost pool. So here we have a new term, the cost pool. So how this activity-based costing is applied? First of all, we identify costs. The first step in ABC is to find the correct amount of costs that we want to allocate. Then we load the cost pools. So cost pool is a special term which allows us to split costs between different activities. Then we select the primary cost pools, create a set of cost pools, and measure activity drivers. Then we allocate costs in secondary pools and charge cost to cost object. And the last step is to formulate reports. Let's see how this algorithm is working in a step-by-step mode. So we can see here that under activity-based costing, we have some non-manufacturing costs that could be assigned to specified products, but only on a cause and effect basis. For example, if we know exactly that sales commission paid to a specified sales manager is really necessary to sell the automobile, for example, which is a very expensive item, we can include this salesman commission to a non-manufacturing cost assigned to a specific product. Because we know that without this non-manufacturing cost, we cannot sell automobile using the same time and using the same cost, using the same price. Therefore, we may include this type of non-manufacturing cost to product costing. If we will be using traditional product costing, of course, all sales commissions are listed in a sales and administrative expenses. So some manufacturing costs may be excluded from product cost. So under traditional costing system, all manufacturing costs are included to a costing basis. Under ABC costing, we can exclude some manufacturing costs. For example, the cost of the idle capacity, because we don't use this equipment or this labor in the process. Next, we can see that under traditional costing system, we can just one cost pool where we allocate over all the expenses we have, and then later split them between different types of products. As we increase the number of cost pools, we increase, of course, the level of complexity of the costing system. So using the process costing, we use the plant-wide overhead rates. Using the second level of complexity stands for departmental overhead rates. And the activity-based costing is the most complex and contains the most number of cost pools. So activity-based costing is not a simple issue. And if you decided to use it within your business, that should be the weighted solution, because it's really requires lots of efforts. So here we meet the specific terms like activity and activity cost pool. What does it mean? You know already that activity is an event that causes the consumption of overhead resources. For example, if we produce ice cream, our activity would be the, for example, freezing process. So one of the activities. And of course, this stage is driving our consumption and therefore could be used as the basis for cost allocation. Activity cost pool is the special cost bucket in which costs related to a single activity measured and accumulated. So activity cost pool means that we define the activity and then collect the expenses that are associated with the same activity. For example, if our activity is freezing, we may collect here the cost of electricity, which is used to freeze the ice cream. We may use the wages of the person who is supervising the camera. We may use here the transportation cost that we use to move our ice cream from production area to this freezing area, and so on and so forth. So activity cost pool collects all expenses, really all costs are related to the specified activity. So activity measure, so we defined activity and then define activity measure. Activity measure means that we have selected the allocation base in an activity-based costing system. So if our activity is freezing, the activity measure could be the electricity used to freeze our camera for 1 degree below zero. So activity measure is always a concrete measurement that is used to allocate the overhead to a specified basis. The term cost driver is also used to refer to an activity measure. So our activity measure could be a cost driver in this costing system. So we have two common types of activity measures. For example, transaction driver and duration driver. Traditional costing system rely on allocation bases that are driven by the volume of production. But of course, different other costing systems may use the duration driver, the measure of the amount of time needed for the specified activity. So it could be based on time as well. So manufacturing companies typically combine their activities into 5 basic classifications. First of all, the unit level activities, then batch level activities. For example, if we produced our level, we have to pack them together to sell. For example, Pepsi Cola is packing not individual bottles, but cases. And the case contains of 12 equal bottles. So batch would be the small portion of our units combined together to make the process of delivery maybe or process of consumption more simple. Product level activity, organization sustaining activity, and customer level activity. So these 5 classifications are always used for manufacturing companies to assign the costs correctly. How to implement the activity-based costing system? When we want to implement the ABC system correctly, we need to find this strong top management support. So if you decide to implement it starting from the accounting department or starting from the production department, you will fail, of course, because this change is a huge change of the process in total, is a very sufficient change of the business model of the company, and of course you should have the support. So it should be linked to how people are evaluated and rewarded. So each person should be informed about their role in this process, and of course the reward of each person should be related to the successful implementation of the ABC costing. And cross-functional teams should be created to understand correctly what are our cost pools, how the flow of the cost is moving from the beginning to the ready material, to the ready products, and therefore this cross-functional communication would help the firm successfully implement the costing system. Let's see on the concrete example how these 5 steps are used. Here we have some example. Baxter Battery Company that sells and produces 2 types of automobile batteries, Sure Start and Long Life as the deluxe battery. And we can see that this company reported the net operating loss. So let's see how this implementation of ABC will tell us the details regarding the cost of goods. Baxter Battery, the ABC teams decided to apply the new idea of the activity cost pools, and they defined 5 cost pools: customer orders, design changes, order size, and customer relations cost pools, and other activities were associated with the other cost pool. Then they decided to select the proper cost driver and activity measure used under each activity. For example, the first department, the first activity used a number of customer orders to assign costs between different products. Of course, design changes used number of design changes. Order size activity cost pool is using machine hours as the activity measure. Customer relations is using number of active customers, and other is the rest of the amount, and activity measure is not applicable, and we will see what to do with these expenses a bit later. So let's see how these departments how these activities are organized. Customer orders assigned all costs of resources that are consumed by taking and processing customer orders, of course. Design changes assigned all costs of resources consumed by customer requested design changes, so as customers are driving these activities. Order size is related to a number of units. Customer relations with customers and other expenses are assigned as organizational sustaining costs and unused capacity cost. So if we do not use the full capacity, we may use this specific cost pool. So let's try to answer several questions based on the information you are provided with. So, how do you think whether those first 2 questions are true or false? So, as I do not see the answer in our chat, we will, I think, discuss this question during the practical issues. So calculate activity rates, and this is a this is the next step. So if we defined the cost pools, we have to allocate direct material, direct labor, and shipping cost directly to cost objects. So here we can see the same approach as we used in previous systems learned. But overhead is allocated using 2 stages. The first stage allocation is to assign cost pools. And then second stage allocation is to define the activity measures. And only after that we have to apply the overhead to a specified product. So this how the system is working. And the fundamental advantage of using an ABC system is to more precisely determine how overhead is used. It is really effective if our overhead is big enough to make sufficient changes in your cost. If we will see it, our Baxter Battery company, we can see several departments here. and the total overhead cost is which is associated with all the departments. We can see that production department is using $14 million dollars of the overhead. So general administrative department a bit less, and marketing department only 2 million. If we decide to apply this, we define our department activities between different cost pools and calculate the proper percentage of impact of each department to the specified operation. And later they will use these percentages to calculate the concrete value of the manufacturing overhead assigned to a specified activity. So here we can see that indirect factory wages that are equal to 1.8, we use the previously calculated percentage, 30%, to find the concrete amount of the indirect factory wages that should be associated with the specified department. In our case, this is the production department. Then we will do the same using all other expenses, and finally our calculations would be as following. So our total overhead is split between activity cost pools. So we can calculate it by operations and in total amount in order to see which activity cost pool require bigger overhead to be applied, and we can see how they are converted into the activity of our production. And when we split the manufacturing overhead between different activities, it's easier to understand how the process is going on, what indirect expenses are associated with the specified activity, and how to manage the costing system and how to make this process more clear and more profitable for the future. So I think it's shortly all for today because our time is gone, as I understand. So any questions from the group? I think questions would have the rest of the flow, but not those 35 students that attend the lecture. So thank you very much for coming. See you on practice. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Goodbye, you too.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.